Osiyo, we're here in Chattanooga, Tennessee at Ross's Landing. This is one of the embarkation points where the Cherokee removal on the Trail of Tears began. The Richard Taylor Detachment left here on September the 20th, 1838, with 51 wagons, 358 riding horses, and 897 people, including our Blair relatives, on the 800-mile forced march to their new homes in what is now Oklahoma. But remember, not all of our Cherokee family were removed from the ancestral lands around the Oconaluftee River and the Great Smoky Mountains in western North Carolina. James Hayes Blair's Cherokee wife, Sally, and his third daughter with Sally, Lucy Blair Timpson, and her family remained with what became the Eastern Band of Cherokee on the Qualla boundary in North Carolina. Lucy was born in 1801. In about 1824, she married John Calvin Timpson, a full-blooded Cherokee. They had 9 children, 7 daughters and 2 sons. Their daughters were Sarah, Mary Ann, Melvina Elizabeth, called Eliza, Martha Jane, Lydia, Nancy, and Caroline. Their sons were John Calvin Jr. and Henry Clay. We'll go back to Ross's Landing in a moment, but before we cross the Tennessee River to begin our journey on the trail, there are a couple of other sites in Chattanooga near the landing that you should know about. In 1817, the Brainerd Mission was established here on land formerly owned by Scottish trader John MacDonald and located across the creek from a large Cherokee settlement. In 1818, the missionaries were tasked with establishing relations with the Cherokee. They were to teach agricultural skills, to educate and civilize the Cherokee, and to introduce the Christian faith and culture, thereby preparing the Cherokee to integrate peaceably with white settlers. Brainerd quickly became the leading mission in the Cherokee Nation, boasting 44 male students and 31 females within the first year, and it was recognized as a national model for the boarding school approach that dominated white attempts to educate Native Americans for most of the 19th century. The mission grounds featured a schoolhouse, mission house, grist mill, sawmill, orchard, barns, dormitories, farm fields, and a cemetery. By mid-1820, the mission operated several other outposts in Tennessee and Georgia. The missionaries at Brainerd Mission, with the aid of the United States government, erected and maintained 40 buildings, serving hundreds of students in the 21 years before the removal of the Indians in 1838. Sadly, a 1-acre cemetery is now the only visible evidence that the prosperous Brainerd Mission ever existed. The cemetery is known to contain the 19th century remains of New England-based missionaries, their children, Cherokee students, and perhaps area slaves. The cemetery and mission site is located in a rather depressed, rundown area of Chattanooga today at 5700 East Gate Loop. And located only about 5.5 miles from Ross's Landing is Brown's Ferry Tavern. Now, Brown's Tavern was built in 1803 for John Brown, who ran a ferry near the spot on the river, which was the border between the Cherokee Nation and the United States. Principal Chief John Ross, the principal chief of the Cherokee at that time, married his wife Quaddy here at the tavern. Brown was actually removed on the Trail of Tears, and Brown's Ferry ironically served as a departure point for many of the Cherokees on the water route down the Tennessee River. Brown's Ferry, a mile or so downstream from the tavern, included a large farm and a mill and a private home, which is now listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Back to Ross's Landing. James Hayes Blair's other 3 children with Sally and their families were not allowed to remain in the East, but were relocated to Oklahoma in 1838 along the Trail of Tears. His son George is verified to have been a part of the Taylor detachment leaving from Ross's Landing, and I believe that his two daughters, Jenny and Margaret, were also a part of that detachment. George was married to Sarah Blythe, a full-blooded Cherokee. They had two sons, Lewis and James, and two daughters, Lucy and Catherine, or Katie. When they set out on the trail to Oklahoma, Lewis was 8 years old, James was 3, Lucy was 2, and Catherine was only 1. Even with all my life and family experiences over 70 plus years, my imagination still will not stretch so much as to imagine walking over 800 miles with a wife and 4 small children, age 1 to 8. In fact, it's even hard for me to imagine driving 800 miles with a crew like that. James, the 3-year-old son, died shortly after the detachment arrived in Oklahoma. After George's daughters grew up in Oklahoma, Lucy married Samuel Houston Benge, and they had 2 daughters, Catherine and Jenny Benge, and 3 sons, George W., Martin Van, and Ross Lomy. Now, the reason I tell you this is that there are still today many people with these surnames in the Cherokee Nation who are related to us in addition to just the Blairs. But wait, let's talk about George's sisters Jenny and Margaret. Both were already married in 1838 also. Jenny's husband was Gordon Sweetwater, a full-blooded Cherokee. Jenny and Gordon also had 4 children to keep up with along the trail, although I can't find any information on their ages or gender. But Jenny was 2 years younger than her brother George, so her kids must have been in the same age ballpark as his and Sarah's. And then there's Margaret, or Peggy, as she was sometimes called. Margaret married a full-blooded Cherokee as well, William Richard Henson, and she was one tough gal. When she and her family set out on the trail in September 1838, their children included Lorena, age 22, Rebecca Creek, age 20, Joseph Martin, called Jowa, age 18, Elizabeth Teachy, age 12, Teachy's twin sister, Sarah Sally, also age 12, William Richard Jr., age 10, Judith, who was 8 years old, Margaret Amelia, who was 6, Delilah, who was 4, and Benjamin Boot, born on the trail in November 1838. Yep, if you're counting, that's 10, but that's not all. After they arrived in Oklahoma and, quote, rested for a couple of years, Margaret and William had 3 more sons, George Thomas, Terrell, and Burrell Calvin. I mean, what else did they have to do except build a completely new life? And to throw a few more surnames out for you to remember, Lorena married a Ruddles, then a Warlick. Rebecca Creek married a Starrett, and then a Martin. Teachy married Davis. Sarah Sally married a Smith. Margaret Amelia married a Crow. And Delilah married a Collins. I can't find any information on whether or not Judith was ever married. So Ross's Landing is where the Trail of Tears began for our Blair relatives. They crossed the Tennessee River with the Taylor detachment and headed northwest to pick up the northern route just outside of what is now McMinnville, Tennessee. There were 3 other detachments which left from Ross's Landing embarkation point, but none of the others joined the northern route. 12 other detachments left Fort Cass, which was located in present-day Charleston, Tennessee, north of Chattanooga, following the northern route to Oklahoma. We'll visit there and other points in Tennessee next time. But the next time you're in Chattanooga area, visit Ross's Landing Riverfront Park. The park memorializes the location where the trail began for our relatives and a couple of thousand other Cherokee. It's located at 101 Market Street on the river in downtown Chattanooga and is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. In addition to Fort Cass, in the next episode we'll visit other significant sites on the trail in Tennessee before we cross into Kentucky. Sites like Red Clay Council Grounds, Blythe's Ferry, the Cherokee Removal Memorial and History Center, and Port Royal State Historic Park. Until then, I'll just say, Donadago Wahi, Wado. Oh, and if you would like to review all of those surnames one more time so that you'll be able to keep all the players straight, in addition to the Blairs, there were the Sweetwaters, the Binge, McEwens, Hensons, Ruddles, Warlicks, Martins, Smiths, Davis, Crows, Collins.